Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
Hello, and you are very welcome to this week's episode of Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I hope you are safe and well as you tune in. Later on in today's programme, we're going to be looking back at Ireland's carbon emissions for 2025, and we'll be looking ahead to the Farming for Nature Festival, which is set to take place in Laois in June, and they're looking for you to get involved. But first things first, it has been a tumultuous couple of days, I think is the only word that I can come up with protesters taking to the highways, byways, ports and depots around the country. And it's all been quite unsettled. Now, things will change, and the very nature of a pre-recorded programme is that things will have changed by the time that this programme goes to air. So we're not going to focus specifically on the up-to-date situation in the protests. We are instead going to focus on the conversation that has been sparked as a direct result of the protests, and that is our reliance on fossil fuels. And to talk to me more about that now, I'm joined once again by the climate and science correspondent for the Irish Times, Caroline O'Doherty. Caroline, you're very welcome back.
Thanks, Aisling.
Caroline, I'm not one to try and, what's that phrase, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but the events of the last week, they have gotten us talking and thinking about our reliance on fossil fuels. And even the war in Iran has been doing that in recent weeks. That's a fair assessment, isn't it?
It is. It's been interesting. I've seen a couple of different reactions. I know people who have electric vehicles, and they're normally very evangelistic about their electric vehicles, and they're very happy to talk about them and invite questions about them. And this week, the last week, they've been kind of going around saying, I'm not saying anything, because they're afraid, when people are out there, and you're paying sort of 30-40% extra for their petrol and diesel, or not able to get petrol and diesel as it was in many cases, the last thing they want to be seen is like gloating. The flip side of that is that, yes, there definitely has been, I think, an upswing in conversation more generally around our reliance on fossil fuels. And anecdotally, certainly solar providers, have said we're getting more queries in. Now, solar is kind of on an upward trajectory anyway. It's one of those technologies that just seems to have taken off. Rooftop solar mainly. Obviously, the bigger solar farms are running into some opposition, the sheer size of them and so on. There's communities not happy about that. But in terms of, panels on my roof, whether the roof is your house or whether it's a shed or a business, it certainly has taken a momentum of its own. But then there's a wider conversation too, and I saw there are representative bodies for the various sort of energies, renewable energies out there and clean energies, and certainly Solar Ireland, we're sort of putting out appeals to the government to say whatever we're doing, we need to do more of it. And they're probably that's a plea that's probably falling on open ears in government. There's another group it's an interesting group. It's academics, it's businesses, it's various groups behind the idea of hydrogen. Clean hydrogen, I stress, because it is possible and does happen that hydrogen is extracted from fossil fuels. But the idea of hydrogen is that, if people aren't aware, it is possible to take hydrogen out of water, H2O, take the H out. And that H is very flexible, very versatile. It can be made into a gas and it can be made into a liquid fuel. To do that requires a massive amount of electricity. It requires a process called electrolysis. And to do that, you need electrolysis plants and a lot of infrastructure. We don't have that. The groups that are behind that are kind of saying, look, when we get the first offshore wind farm, and even now that we have onshore wind farms, there are times when they're producing too much wind, and we have to turn them off.
And we've talked about that here in the show. The electricity grid, it's a big weakness here.
It is a big weakness, and you need some way to store that electricity in some way. And obviously, you can do that with batteries to an extent. But if they're saying if all the excess electricity, the surplus electricity, could be used in electrolysis plants and create hydrogen, hydrogen can be stored.
Oh, I see.
And then it can be stored as gas. It can be stored as liquid. And now it's not a new technology as such. It would be completely new for Ireland, and it would require expensive infrastructure. So the government needs to make it. The government has kind of hydrogen strategy, but it's quite loose. It's more about research and so on. They're saying we need to be preparing for that in parallel, so that when the first offshore wind farm hopefully starts around 2031, 2032 here, that this is ready to go. And so that there's no curtailing, there's no switching off of turbines, which after all the effort that's gone in to get offshore wind farms, it would be just an atrocity really to see them switched off. So they're kind of trying to strike while the iron is hot, if you like, while the conversation is on. I'd say maybe the past week mightn't have been the best time, because government was, trying to eat their Easter eggs and reluctantly coming back to the Dáil and all of that. But certainly, I think over the next short while, the next few weeks, I think there might be sort of willing ears in government who might put a sort of put a push on that and see the sense in it, because so many of those big trucks that we saw during the protests, and the tractors and the machinery and even the big buses, realistically, for quite some time, they're not going to be electric, because our battery technology is such that you would be putting a giant battery on them, and they'd sink. They'd break the bridges, they'd break the roads, and they'd sink in the fields. And they need massive charging capacity. So there is, Dublin Bus has a few hydrogen buses. So it is possible to use hydrogen fuel for those big trucks and that big farm machinery. So there's a solution potentially for the future.
And that sounds very helpful, because there has been so much talk. We've talked about it here on the show about this problem that we're generating all of this renewable electricity through wind turbines, and then we're going, oh, hang on a second, there's too much here, we have to shed it. And that's just wasteful. So if it could be turned through electrolysis and into a hydrogen plant, and you get fuel that way, the benefit of all of that is fantastic, because we're generating it all here on the island ourselves, as opposed to like oil and gas at the moment is being shipped into the country from abroad, and we're very reliant on the rest of the world being very stable and being able to provide that to us.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain irony that the term energy security has been used a lot by government. It's in government policy. It's one of the reasons they want to build the LNG terminal in Kerry and so on. And a lot of the concerns that they're talking about is, what if Russia, bombs our underwater interconnector, the gas interconnector with Britain, and it's all about these big threats and so on. And then we find it's kind of simpler threats. It's people saying you can't put ships out. It's not the big technical cybersecurity, or so that there's fear that they might get into our databases and actually just mess up things, so that literally gas and oil doesn't flow. Sometimes it's the simplest things. It's country saying, no, we're not letting the ships out, or the ships that are arriving at the ports. We have farmers and tractors saying, well, we're not going to let the oil and diesel out. We really, so we can sometimes focus on the big complicated threats and forget that it doesn't take an awful lot, to just turn things upside down within our own country. So, yeah, I mean, there was a loose proposal and some, very preliminary proposals for an electrolysis plant in Cork. Now, it ran into a lot of local opposition, and that's, I suppose, when there's a new technology, people did not like the idea of an electrolysis plant using large amounts of seawater, large amounts of electricity. There was concerns about even, well, if you're splitting the H2O and the O is out there, I mean, what happens? Could there be an explosive capacity? So it is in use in other countries. We would need to start a conversation here about it and find locations that are sort of community friendly, in the sense that maybe there isn't a community directly nearby, or where there's a community that are kind of happy enough to say, yeah, that sounds okay.
I remember there was huge opposition and concern back in the day to a gas depot being built in Mayo. And people were genuinely frightened that this thing was going to explode and they were all going to die. Like, they had genuinely, in hindsight, that sounds crazy, because we have gas in our homes and, people have gas stoves and it's all minded and safe. But people were genuinely afraid. And perhaps we can learn from that. And maybe you would hope, if this were to happen, be more proactive around the communications around it, so that people don't have those unfounded fears.
Look, there was a time when, people were afraid to have microwaves in their house.
Yeah.
Now, that's not to be dismissive of people's concerns when there's a new technology. And it's not to say that you'd be blasé. Like these are technologies that, there's no room for mistake on them. Um, but I think the more people understand, and the more people see examples elsewhere, it's the same thing with the solar. People could actually see it. It's not an invisible tech. A lot of our technologies are invisible. We flick a switch and something happens somewhere that creates an energy that powers it. That's as much as we know about it. People don't see it. They do
Mhm.
not see it. And particularly because in Ireland, because our oil has come from offshore, our gas comes from mainly offshore. When it came from Mayo, that we had a little bit of a more, a sight on it, I suppose. We did have oil off the southwest, or gas from off the southwest coast for a while, but it's still not all that visible. And we used coal for years and years and years for a lot of our electricity, which came from Northern Colombia, and nobody saw what went on there, stripping this vast agricultural area, formerly agricultural area, of coal. So we're not used to seeing what makes our energy, what makes our electricity, what makes our fuel. And now, you more and more are asking people, big solar farms, bigger and bigger turbines, maybe, an electrolysis plant, maybe a gas plant, maybe the bioenergy plants, the anaerobic digesters. Suddenly people are coming more face to face with these kind of technologies, and the big battery storage installations as well. And people are forgetting, well, there's batteries all around your house. It's just energy has been quite seamless and quite
Mm.
invisible for us for a long time. And when we start to see these kind of technologies and this kind of infrastructure, which previously happened somewhere else, and we just benefited from the end product, and now it's in our country, and we have to be very grown up and very calm and questioning. As I say,
Yes.
there's no room for mistake on any of these. We can't be blasé about it. We can't cut corners. But we do need people to think a little bit more. And as I say, it's always been a wonderful privilege of being in a rich country where you don't have to think where your energy comes from. Now people do need to know and do need to understand.
And it has all brought up the question once again of nuclear energy. And a lot of people, I think, would not understand that we do actually import energy that is generated through nuclear processes, but just in other countries, or not think about the fact that some of us go on holidays to France and there might be a nuclear power plant a couple of kilometres down the road from the campsite that we're staying in. It's all very commonplace on the continent. And this has gotten people talking about that once again as perhaps something we should have done 2 decades ago.
Yeah, and maybe, maybe. We had a very strange attitude 2 decades ago. We were still opening up new peat-powered,
Yeah.
electricity plants, which was absolutely bonkers in retrospect. And we were ignoring, the one crowd who put the one small offshore wind farm and sort of saying, well, good for them, but like that's not our policy. So, I mean, there was a lot of short-sightedness 20 years ago. Um, um, and nuclear, probably the thing about 20 years ago is that nuclear was still these very, very large nuclear plants. Again, massive amount of infrastructure, very, very expensive. The Sellafield type, the big funnel things that we see. And again, for a small country, now obviously the population has grown a lot in the last 20 years, but I can kind of understand why it was considered not necessary for Ireland. And just also the location issue.
Mm.
The opposition going back to the 70s, in Carnsore Point in Wexford, that memory lives long, people. And when people are objecting to wind turbines and solar farms, you'd have to ask, where would you locate a nuclear power plant? Now we do have this evolving technology, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about it too. I've heard people say, well, France has a small modular reactors, and Google have small modular reactors, and they're very small, and they're right beside their business, and why don't we have one? Can I point out, there are pilot small modular reactors out there. There really isn't something off the shelf that Ireland could say, we'll have one of those in blue. Thanks very much. Um, Canada is, the Canadian government currently have an order in, and they're building the first of what will be 4, a cluster of 4. They're very expensive. They'll work out, the cost for their first one now will work out at about €3.5 billion. So, and it will produce about the same amount of electricity, and possibly less even, than one of our €1 billion offshore wind farms.
Okay.
People might say, well, it'll last longer because the wind farms, maybe will have a certain lifespan. They will, but the legacy is nuclear waste.
Yeah.
Even with these smaller ones, there will be where are we going to put that? So I think there's a kind of a healthy call for let's have a chat about it. There's a lot of madness, and from some public representatives too, saying we should be doing this right now. And you think, well, okay, we can start a conversation right now. We don't have a base load of scientists in this country or engineers who know anything about nuclear. They know a bit, they know the theories. There is some work goes on. It's not that we don't have anything, but it's just because it's not been our policy, or it's not been on our horizon. So we would be importing everybody with knowledge of that, whereas we are building up a good knowledge of wind and solar. But look, I think there's less opposition out there to having the chats about it.
Yes.
And it's not a big deal, and people are saying, oh, the law would have to be changed and so on. I remember looking before, and there's a tiny piece of like a one line or one sentence in one piece of legislation. It's not like we have a Nuclear Prevention Act that would have to be, completely dismantled, and then you'd have to check every other piece of law that might also reference this act, which often happens when you're trying to change a piece of law and you discover, oh my goodness, it's referenced in a load of legislation. It's a piece in, I think, the Electricity Act of whatever year, and it's literally one-liner. So it could be, so there isn't a great legislative barrier to discussing, planning, poking around in the idea of nuclear. I just think people would need to be realistic. There isn't a small modular reactor model out there that's immediately suitable for Ireland. There isn't an off-the-shelf option, which is what you'd be looking for. You'd be looking for one that has been proven. And where do you put it? This is a big question. Where do you put it on this island of ours?
I think, though, even to bring the conversation back to the individual, and when, like at certain times of the year, normally January and July 1st, when people want their new numbers on their car regs, the conversation turns to new electric car sales. And the fears that people have around electric cars, generally speaking, is about range anxiety. And in a very, very real way, many of us, like I drive a hybrid, so I need petrol, and mine is not a plug-in hybrid, it's a hybrid. And, I had to go and fill the car up with petrol on Friday because I knew I was going to need it next week, and I didn't know was I going to be able to get it next week. And I think that put perhaps a different perspective on the reliance on fossil fuels, whether it's petrol or diesel cars in particular, for individuals commuting to work, bringing the kids to school, whatever it might be. Like, I was surprised to learn, Caroline, we actually only have 1,500 petrol stations in the country. Do you know what it's not? So actually, we're not as, it's not as different to having to get to a car charger, and that range anxiety, is it?
That you've hit something there incredibly, accurately. When you drive around the smaller roads of Ireland these days, you see the carcasses of old petrol stations.
Yeah.
Not even that old. They've gone in the last 10 years. There are much fewer petrol stations than there used to be. So you're absolutely right. You do have to go further now. You do have to plan ahead if you're on petrol or diesel. And it isn't that much different. Now, I think, again, the government has been slow on this. Again, if you can see it, you can trust it. If people can see more on-street charging points, more community area charging points. So you see maybe the big supermarket that might have 2 or 3 tucked at the end of the car park, usually in the darkest end, which is not great in winter. If you're on your own and you're kind of looking around and how long will I stand here before I start to feel, uncomfortable. But if there were much more of them, and every swimming pool, I'd love to say every school, but we've so many schools that barely have, particularly in urban areas, that don't even have playgrounds or very tiny playgrounds. But anywhere that you can, if there are charges, then people don't feel that they would not feel that fear.
And
Also,
that's something the
battery.
government can do. That's something the government has control over.
It does, and it has a number of schemes. But as with every scheme, there's always kind of a long run in. There's a scheme for, there was a scheme which shamefully local authorities did not pick up. There was a scheme since 2018 or 2019 where the government was going to fund most of the cost of putting in an on-street charging point. And the rows over, well, we'd have to take one, parking space out of commission, one general parking space out of commission, or, and it just didn't happen. They literally didn't. There was money going and they didn't apply for it. They literally did not. If I remember correctly, I think Laois was one of the first who did, and maybe Dunleary, Rathdown County Council, were one of the two who got going on it. So but the other schemes are, there is a community scheme. There's one for GAA clubs, not just GAA clubs, but sports clubs. There are various schemes, and it might be timely for me to do a little bit of a number check and say, well, how many applications, how many petrol stations, how many are actually in? There's also help for the purely commercial, so the big forecourt, out on the M4, out in the M7, or wherever it is. There's some assistance there for them as well, and they do have, I suppose, more. And you do see the numbers there growing. So you might see a bank of 6 or 7 now in some of the bigger stations, and there might be a queue for those as well. So, but yeah, I think that thing of we need to see it. So and particularly, and we have an issue, of course, we're building more and more apartments, and more people are going to be living in apartments. So they don't have driveways and they don't have a place at the front of their house. So we do need that rule about, if you build so many apartments, you have to have so many chargers. It needs to be very, very, severely enforced. I would say extended. You don't just need a handful of them. You need, half the underfloor, the underground car park needs to be with electric chargers. Whether it's somebody using it or not, they need to be available.
And I think after the week that was, and we do hope that in the coming week things get back to a sense of whatever normality is these days, because Lord only knows that's hard to figure out at the moment with the way the world is, but that we start seeing, instead of media having these conversations, because I think that is worthwhile, but that actually real conversations in the houses of power start happening around all of this to try and get us generating our own electricity, our own fuels, and just make it easier for people to make these more environmental and sustainably friendly choices.
And so say all of us.
Well, Caroline O'Doherty, climate and science correspondent with the Irish Times, thank you as always for joining us here on Let's Go Green. After the break, we will be joined by a representative of the Environmental Protection Association to talk to us about Ireland's carbon emissions in 2025. Stay tuned.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. And we're joined now by Dr. Maria Martin, a senior manager with the Environmental Protection Association. Maria, you are very welcome to Let's Go Green.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Maria, you and your colleagues have been looking at Ireland's greenhouse gas emissions from power generation and industry over the last 12 months in 2025. So what have you found?
Well, these are the emissions from a particular sector, the emissions trading sector. So that includes power generation and large energy users like big food companies, dairy plants, the cement industry. And we found that their emissions in 2025 had decreased compared to 2024 by 5.5%. Now, the biggest decrease occurred from the electricity generation sector. They were down by 8.9%. And then manufacturing industry emissions decreased by 2.5%, with some companies decreasing more than others. And overall, then, it's a good thing to see a decrease. But of course, we can always do more.
Exactly.
So on the other hand, we also, as part of the EU emissions trading system, we have a duty to regulate the aviation industry. So those are the large airlines that are have their offices in Ireland.
Okay.
So we're looking at the emissions throughout the EEA under the system, but there are a specific number that are offices registered in Ireland, and then there are smaller aircraft operators that are assigned to us because at one point in the past, most of their emissions were occurring coming in and out of Ireland. So, and that sector, I'm sorry to say, there is an increase in the emissions. It's up by 2%. And we hope that in the future that will also come down further by the use of sustainable aviation fuels and other um, incentives that they will be given to reduce their emissions.
And if we look at if we leave the aviation sector to one side for a moment and the areas where you did say that you've seen this decrease, I know in terms of power generation, the fact that Moneypoint, which was using coal, it ceased operations in June of last year. So that had an impact, I take it, on the decrease in carbon emissions from electricity generation in particular.
Yes, historically, Moneypoint would have been the biggest emitter that we had in terms of CO2. And that was because it was using coal. It was our last coal plant. So for half of last year, they still produced some power from coal, and then it ceased in June, as you said. It's now on standby in case of a shortage of power on the national grid. It can still run, but only using fuel oil, not using coal. And it's not part of the general electricity market anymore. It is just in that kind of reserve mode. They're developing other power solutions in the area.
So we know that, say, the change in how Moneypoint operates, that it's no longer in day-to-day use, it's now as an emergency function where it needed. What other reasons do we have for this? Because as you say, it's positive that this we have seen this decrease, but maybe in the other areas, what has led to this decrease in carbon emissions?
So there's a somewhat of an increase in renewables again last year as we continue to build up our capacity in terms of renewables like wind energy and solar power. And then also there's an increase in importation of electricity across the interconnectors. So we have more net imports as a percentage of our total demand last year than the previous year.
And is that in itself a positive? Like, do we know for like the energy that we're importing, does it come from a lower carbon emitting source, or can we track that? Do we have that ability?
We don't have the ability to track it, but we know that a lot of it is coming from the UK, and just like Ireland, they are making efforts to reduce their carbon footprint. And they have a lot more renewables coming on stream. So, we don't have the ability to track it, but we know that overall the UK has a reducing carbon intensity of electricity.
And this, of course, here we know that we've seen, there's plans for offshore wind energy projects, perhaps more renewable sources across the island. You would like to think that in time this will all improve?
Yes, we would.
Okay. So then when we look at the cement industry, it's something that we perhaps don't think about all that often. We know it exists. We know we need it to build houses and hospitals and what have you. But a 3.6% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions, why did that happen?
Because there was a reduction in the amount of clinker produced overall. We have 4 cement plants, and they also are using more alternative fuels.
Okay.
So they're using an increased amount of waste that can be used in the cement industry. So they're licensed by the EPA to allow a certain amount of waste to be used instead of pet coke and other fossil fuels. So while production of waste is not something that we like to see, and we'd like to see more reuse of materials and so on, but eventually on the waste hierarchy, it is important that there is a recovery of energy. It's better than disposal of the waste into a landfill. it's always better to recover the energy. And this is one way of recovering the energy, is through the cement plants.
Okay, so even the cement industry is trying to be a more circular type industry in how it's working.
Yes.
So this, as you say, it is all positive, with the exception of the aviation industry. But even there are efforts to create more sustainable aviation fuel. What kind of progress do you expect that an improvement in the aviation sector in the near future? Like creating a new fuel seems like a very big task altogether.
Well, yes, I mean, there is a very strong safety considerations in the aviation industry, and they have to be taken on board. But I think across the globe, there is an effort to use sustainable aviation fuels, and the ETS has a twofold incentive there, because in the first place, once it's proven that the fuel is sustainable and meets the requirements of what's the Renewable Energy Directive, in terms of sustainability and greenhouse gas savings, because you could have something which is from a sustainable source, but if it was brought over from the other side of the world to be used in Ireland, for example, then there would be other emissions associated with the transport of that fuel. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And so once it meets those considerations under the Renewable Energy Directive and is certified correctly, it becomes what's called zero rated for the ETS. So instead of saying it has X tons of carbon associated with that tonnage of fuel, you say no, it's zero.
Okay.
And so that's already an incentive, because they don't have to go and buy the carbon allowances under the emissions trading system for that usage. But it's not considered to be enough of an incentive, because the price of sustainable aviation fuels is so high. And so another incentive was introduced under the ETS. A certain amount of allowances were set aside to be auctioned for the purpose of free allocation to the aviation industry. And uh, the companies can use the sustainable aviation fuel and then make an application to be given those free allowances. So we have two major airlines in Ireland that are applying for those this year, and we have to do the assessment. But we're happy to see that there's an increase compared to 2024. So that incentive, um, increased incentive, was introduced in 2024, and it looks at the differential in price between the price of the aviation fuel and the price of the sustainable aviation fuel and the price of normal aviation fuel. So we'll be looking at those applications, and hopefully we'll be able to give the green light on those as well this year.
I think oftentimes we think of the fact that, like, a lot of companies, say international companies in the tech sector, are registered here and they're established here. We forget actually that in the aviation sector there's quite a large footprint here in the island as well. So it's interesting that you have that role in that area. Maria, what does all of this tell us about energy security? Because even if you went back to, Storm Éowyn, I think woke a lot of us up to whether or not we were prepared for, say, a power outage for a prolonged period of time. So can we extrapolate from your findings and look at energy security at all?
Well, I think it shows that, like I said at the beginning, a certain amount of work has been done. More needs to be done in terms of renewables, things like not just wind but battery storage, and the use of solar, etc. They can all help, and the use of sustainable fuels. That can mean that we're using, for example, hydro-treated vegetable oil. That could be waste oil that's produced in Ireland that we also need to use. But some of it, of course, comes from outside the country, and we have to look carefully at the chain there of the treatment of and the source of the hydro-treated vegetable oils. But they're all areas that more and more industries are looking at. For example, the data centers are now using a lot more of that hydro-treated vegetable oil, or HVO, And we also have one small backup power plant that's using it, well, at least in 2025, they used it exclusively. They didn't use any fossil fuel. So they're all positive signs. And it's good that people are willing to try these alternative fuels, and it can all, it's going to be necessary to have many different options in place, because relying on any one option wouldn't be prudent.
And this is all hopefully going in the right direction, perhaps not as fast as, well, yourselves and your colleagues might have wanted to see it, but it is positive that progress is finally being made.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Maria Martin of the EPA, a Senior Manager at the Environmental Protection Agency, thank you so much for joining us on Let's Go Green today.
Thank you for your time.
We'll be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
Hello, and you are very welcome to this week's episode of Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. I know we're just over Easter and we're just into spring, but summer festival season is only around the corner. And if you've been listening to Midlands 103 and Let's Go Green for a while now, you know that we talk to the people from Farming for Nature on a fairly regular basis about all the work they're doing. And now this year they have decided to put a festival on. So to find out more about that, I'm joined now by Lydia Lishman of Farming for Nature, who has the unenviable task, Lydia, of coordinating this festival. You're very welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
So, Lydia, tell me first, for people who might not have heard of Farming for Nature previously, what exactly is your organisation all about?
So Farming for Nature is an initiative that was set up by the Burren Bio Trust in 2018, really to support and highlight farmers that are doing great things for nature across the country. We aim to identify and promote farmers that are doing great things for nature on their farm to improve farmland biodiversity.
And that is now, it's a nationwide initiative, really, isn't it?
Yes, it's a nationwide initiative. We have over 100 ambassadors who are our exemplar farmers doing great things for nature across the country.
And what might that look like? So when you have this exemplar farmer, what might they be doing that caught your eye?
So it's all about, firstly, really showcasing these farmers and sharing their enthusiasm and their practical ideas about how they can improve their farmland and do a little bit for nature.
Fantastic. So then tell me then about this festival that you've got coming up in June. Like why have a festival?
So we're having this festival really to connect farmers from across the country and create a space where these farmers can learn from each other about all the challenges and the opportunities and the decisions involved in farming for nature. So the festival is all about sharing real stories from real farmers about farming for nature.
I guess the challenge really is that, like any solo business owner, it can feel quite isolating, can't it? Like out on the farm, you're out doing the jobs all day, you're busy all day. But for a lot of farmers, they are working in isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's another big part of this festival, as well as a great lineup of speakers and discussions. And this is really about a sociable element as well, to bring together farmers and have a kind of relaxed sociable gathering too.
So tell me about it then. Like, how does it? We're a couple of weeks out from it now, but what's it all looking like, and how's it shaping up?
Yeah, so we have a great program of farmers. These are really exemplar farmers from all the way across Ireland, from Northern Ireland, from right the way across the Republic of Ireland. And the sessions are really focusing on transitioning to a way of farming for nature and why you might transition, looking at the gains for nature, for your farm and for your pocket. So we have a number of indoor sessions that we're running with one of our core collaborators, Base Ireland. And we are also doing sessions in the field with really practical, hands-on demonstrations from farmers.
So it's an opportunity to get indoors and to learn from people who've been there, done that, and then to go and put that into action.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really getting those real stories from farmers, the kind of the good, the bad, and the challenges, not just the success stories. And yeah, as well, as I mentioned, it's also very collaborative. So we have other partners like Knots Ireland and a lot of people who are coming together with Farming for Nature to put on this festival and make it a great day out.
So then, where is it all taking place?
So it's all taking place at a beautiful venue called Ballykilcavan Brewery. It's just outside Stradbally in County Laois, and it's a working farm, and it has woodland and grassland and tillage. So as well as having these indoor demonstrations, we're able to show people the kind of working farm as well and the practical demos there.
And this, at the moment, you're all in the organisation phase for it. It's going to take place towards the end of June. Are you looking for people to get involved in any shape or form?
Yeah, I mean, we're really hoping for people to go to the website and purchase tickets. They are available now. And there's also camping on site. So if people want to make a full experience of it, you can book on site to stay as well.
That's lovely. So when exactly is it taking place and how do we get tickets?
So it's taking place on the 22nd and 23rd of June. And to get tickets, you can go to the festival website, which is www.farmingfornaturefestival.ie. And you can find out all about the day, the programme, the speakers, and how to book tickets from there.
So farmingfornaturefestival.ie to get your tickets, to book your camping spot, to do all of that lovely jazz. And it is the 22nd and the 23rd of June, Lydia, so just after the winter solstice.
Yeah, exactly. So
summer solstice. I do apologise before anybody thinks I've lost the plot, but a lovely time of year for something like this.
Yes, exactly. So there's that kind of cultural element as well, you know, as well as having the festival, we're also basing it around the solstice. Yeah.
And if people want more information, it's all on farmingfornaturefestival.ie, Lydia.
Yes, that's right. So just go to the website and you can find out who's talking, when they're talking, how to get there, and to book your tickets as well.
Fantastic. Well, Lydia Lishman of Farming for Nature, thank you so much for joining us on Let's Go Green to tell us all about your new festival, and I hope it gets a really good turnout for you in June on the 22nd and 23rd of June. We will be back after the break.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.
You're listening to Let's Go Green here on Midlands 103. Now, I hope you've enjoyed our show so far this week. And if our conversations with Caroline O'Doherty, in particular, the climate and science correspondent of the Irish Times, got you thinking about, well, how you put energy into your own home, how you fuel your car or your truck or whatever it might be. You know, it is worth looking into what options are most appropriate to you, your family and your household. And if you're going to do that, it's worth looking into the SEAI's website, Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. So if you've looked at what's been happening over the past week and thought, you know what, maybe I should look at converting to a heat pump to heat my home, or maybe now's the time to look at whether or not I could get myself a second-hand electric car, and you want to learn about getting a charger for your home, the SEAI.ie is what I would recommend as your first port of call, because that's where you're going to find out all the up-to-date information and all the grants that are currently available and the requirements, what you need to do before you do anything, you know, what you need to apply for, the bit of paperwork that's needed. But in my experience, if going onto the website and seeing, you know, there's this grant for that and I'm not really sure what I need and this is all a little bit overwhelming, pick up the phone to the SEAI. Now, I know in modern times, picking up the phone sounds very old-fashioned altogether, But nothing beats picking up the phone and getting a bit of advice and speaking to somebody in the SCAI about what they offer and what might be most suitable for your home, and maybe getting a grant to get somebody out to your home to do an assessment to see what could be done in your house. What is, what might be the most financially responsible way of tackling it in your home in particular? Because it's one thing looking at a guide price to do a full retrofit on a 3-bed semi-D, but actually, how much will it actually cost in your home? Because maybe your 3-bed semi-D is slightly different to my 3-bed semi-D, for example. So if you've been thinking, given what's been happening in the last couple of days and maybe feeling anxious about it, because I think that would be a very fair response, it's worth taking a look at the SCAI's website, giving them a call and seeing where they can steer you and where you might start your journey off if that has been something that's been on your mind. Because oftentimes when we start talking about what grants are available, you might have Johnny or Mary down the road who did something 5 years ago and maybe, but they only got that amount of money and sure, things are more expensive now. So that's not going to cover it. These grants are updated regularly. Things do change. So you're better off going directly to the source and finding out what you yourself and your household are eligible for and what the most appropriate thing would be for you and your home. And particularly if you've got elderly or vulnerable people in your lives, maybe looking at the criteria for the Warmer Homes scheme, which may be really useful in your particular case, because there's been, so much talk about people getting to work and getting to school in recent days, but there's also an awful lot of people under pressure who are particularly vulnerable or maybe elderly and need to be at home and use more heat more often, and that's a huge expense. So maybe the Warmer Home scheme or something like it might be of use to you and your household. So I just said I'd mention it in case it's of help. I hope, as I said, that you've enjoyed this show. As always, if there is something that you'd like us to tackle on the show, please do get in contact with me. You can go on to midlands103.com, click on the on-air team and send me, Aisling O'Rourke, a message from there. Or you can email me directly, hello@thecommunicationscoach.ie. That is my work email and I will be sure to respond. I do read all the messages and I really do appreciate them. And of course, if you tune in to us on your favourite podcast app, please do give us a 5-star rating and even a review. Do you know, on Spotify, you can comment on individual episodes now. All of that helps spread the word about the podcast as a show. Basically, it keeps the podcast app algorithms happy and makes them show it to more people. And of course, we always want more people to find out about all the wonderful things that are happening here in the Midlands and the efforts that are underway here in the Midlands to tackle climate change and environmental issues. So please do keep in contact with us and share the programme widely. I hope that you have a good week. As I said to Caroline earlier on in the show, I hope things do calm down in the next couple of days and we all get a little bit of a reprieve. But for now, stay safe and have a great week and stay tuned to Midlands 103.
Let's Go Green, sponsored by EirGrid, managing and operating Ireland's electricity grid for a cleaner energy future. Check out airgrid.ie for more.